Hi everyone, so my name is Ben. I'm going to be talking today to you about cryptoeconomics. So we're going to be defining what cryptoeconomics is, hopefully making the case for why it's important, and then basically outlining some of what we define as the core modules that fall within this discipline. So for context, I'm a cryptoeconomic designer. I have my own design agency called Token Architecture, and I'm also the member of a research group called Just Cryptoeconomics. So this is our agenda for today. So we're going to start by defining the term, defining the field, and then trying to make the case about its importance, its relevance, and its purpose. And then we're going to start with some of the core modules. We won't be able to cover everything today, but we'll be going from token utility all the way through to governance. So first of all, I'd like to share with you our definition. So this definition comes from our research group, and it's a two-part definition. So cryptoeconomics is an interdisciplinary field, and it sits at the intersection of technology and economics, and it concerns the development of economies that are underpinned by blockchain technology. It focuses on the use of incentive structures to align individual actions with the goals of entire systems and projects, and effectively manages digital rights and resources. And it does this all without the need for central intermediaries. So let's break that down a little bit more. So the real purpose of cryptoeconomics is to create secure, resilient, and vibrant distributed systems through the use of incentives, and that's primarily done through tokens. Its scope, so although it's primarily concerned with tokens, it does actually consider all of the economic considerations of an on-chain system. And so while tokens are often the focus for cryptoeconomics practitioners, as they're working with projects, a practitioner has to be aware of the entire economic toolset when designing on-chain systems. And that's really where cryptoeconomics, we would differ from tokenomics or token economics, which are terms you might be familiar with. And for us, cryptoeconomics is a slightly broader and slightly deeper field, but that's just our opinion. And third and finally, it's an interdisciplinary field. So as mentioned, it sits at the intersection of technology, or more specifically, blockchain technology and cryptography, and then economics. But it also draws on a variety of existing and traditional fields. And so as a researcher and practitioner, you have to be aware not only of your own subject matter, but also these various fields that have come to inform cryptoeconomics over the years. So hopefully everyone here is somewhat convinced of the value and importance of blockchain technology, but you might be wondering why cryptoeconomics specifically is relevant. So for us, really, cryptoeconomics goes further and unlocks much of the value of blockchain technology. So blockchain technology is great for creating secure systems that are resilient. It comes with interoperability, composability, enables automation, and a whole host of other useful features. But the economics from token economies and sort of economic on-chain systems increases that value significantly. And it does so because primarily it enables open participation, so any person across the world can participate economically in a cryptoeconomic system. So they can be a service provider. For instance, you could be a validator in the context of Ethereum. You can actually own the protocol in the case of a DAO. You can participate in governance, but at the same time, in theory at least, benefit from the financial upside that comes with the growth and value of the system. And we're principally achieving that through the use of incentive mechanisms, and tokens are obviously a key part of that. And ultimately, well-designed cryptoeconomic systems can enable projects that can grow at otherwise faster rates and would otherwise not be possible. So one example of this might be to compare Ethereum to Hyperledger. So Hyperledger is a sort of enterprise-type smart contract platform or framework for creating platforms, but it doesn't have a native token or doesn't really have a native economic layer, whereas Ethereum does. And I think much of Ethereum's success has come from the enfranchisement of kind of a broader community through those financial incentives that are inherent to Ethereum's design. So cryptoeconomics as a field is an emerging one. It's still developing, it's very much nascent. We've developed a framework to differentiate and delineate between the different areas to try and bring some kind of structure and formality to the discipline. And we distinguish between the core areas of cryptoeconomics, which is what we'll be focusing on today, as well as related areas. So these are the areas that practitioners should be aware of and may offer as part of their services, and then excluded areas. So these are the areas that fall within the auspices of the blockchain industry, to use that term, but wouldn't fall under cryptoeconomics. So these are the core areas that we define under cryptoeconomics. So token utility and rights, which we'll be talking about in a couple of slides here. Value accrual, so how value accrues to a system, and then ultimately the tokens. Rewards, both token and non-token based. Supplies, the total token supply that exists, and how that changes over time. Token allocation, so how different tokens are awarded and distributed to different stakeholder parties. Then the actual distribution mechanism itself, whether it's a sale, airdrop, or otherwise. Governance, so governance is an incredibly broad topic. We separate the more kind of economically intrinsic parts of governance that fall under the core modules here versus more peripheral areas of governance, which we include under related areas. And then the three we won't have time to talk about today are cryptoeconomic security, economic assurances and market forces, and then finally networking community. And the related areas, so as mentioned, these are the areas that affect cryptoeconomics, but they're not necessarily integral to the field. So that would be technological choices, so being aware of your L1, L2 blockchain selection, wallet choices, interoperability, and other middleware that affects your design. The other areas of governance, as mentioned, stakeholder analysis, so being able to analyze the behaviors via on-chain analysis of different stakeholders and participants. Token investment analysis, so taking a cryptoeconomic lens and framework and applying that to token investment. And then legal and regulatory compliance, so obviously a large part of token issuance is deciding which jurisdiction you can be launching a token from. And so being aware of the different regulatory frameworks is an important aspect. And then the excluded areas that might fall under kind of a blockchain consultancy but wouldn't be under the realm of cryptoeconomics would be product design and strategy, marketing, sales and business development, off-chain decision making, and then legal structuring of off-chain entities. What these all have in common is that they're all kind of off-chain decisions, and they're also not inherently economic, at least not considering the token itself. So our first core module is token utility and rights, and any kind of cryptoeconomic design begins with this module, and in many ways it's the most important part of any design. So token utility just defines the practical uses and functions of a token within a system, and ultimately the token utility choice is going to drive demand for the token as well as value accrual, and it incentivizes participants and stakeholders to hold and use the token over time. We defined 9 different types of token utility, so this is a framework that we inherited from a previous cryptoeconomic company we worked for, but we've iterated on this framework, and we'll be going through each of these briefly. And then token rights are very closely aligned with token utilities, but there are subtle differences. So token utility refers to what I, as the token holder, can use the token to do within a system, whereas rights refer to like the actual benefits that can be enforced that I receive as a token holder. So for instance, in the case of a DAO, if the DAO were to dissolve, then I might have the right to a proportional share of the assets under management of that DAO. So that's more of a right than utility. But ultimately, whenever we're designing token utilities, they have to be informed by the overall goals of the system that we've outlined. So we're going through the 9 different types of token utility here. So first is asset ownership. So these tokens, they essentially just represent a claim to an off-chain asset. So stable coins, or at least collateralized stable coins, are a good example of this. So USDC just represents a dollar claim over US dollars held in the bank account. Contribution tokens, sometimes referred to as work tokens. These essentially allow you to perform work for a system. So in the case of 1inch, for instance, if you stake the 1inch token, you can participate in the process of routing transactions. Staking Ethereum or Ether as a validator would also be an example of this. Commodity tokens, so these allow you to access a good or a service typically on-chain, and the token is consumed partially or wholly in the process of doing so. So when you perform a transaction on Ethereum, a portion or some of that Ether is consumed by the network and the system. So you're essentially consuming the commodity to perform some kind of service or work.
Is Ethereum a commodity though?
That's how we use it. This is not an academic framework, it's our own framework as a research group. So happy to discuss. Dividend, so this is the eligibility to a share of proceeds from the platform. We can think of this as somewhat analogous to a security. We use the term dividend. Revenue sharing or fee generation sharing would also be applicable. So for instance, previously Binance committed to using 20% of its profits to buy back and burn the BNB token. So like I mentioned, this would be the closest to a kind of security or a securities token. And then governance. So governance tokens allow you as the token holder to make decisions for about the system. So many DeFi tokens, for instance, have this utility, and MakerDAO's MKR token is a prominent example of this. And then membership, so if you hold a token, you get access to certain benefits, either as part of a community, a group, or a broader system, DAO, or even a network state. So NFTs are often a common example of this. If you hold a certain NFT within a community, then you, in theory, at least, get access to certain benefits, and those could be on-chain and off-chain benefits. And then our final three, and the first two are probably the most familiar for folks here. So the first would be payments. So Bitcoin is an example of this, whereby you can use BTC, at least in theory, to pay for products and services. The original vision of Bitcoin as a peer-to-peer electronic money system speaks to this. And then store of value is related, obviously, to payments, but we think in recent years those two have somewhat delineated. So, for instance, a stablecoin might count as a payments token, but hard to argue that it would necessarily function as a store of value, or at least some people would dispute that it does. Whereas assets like BTC, at least in theory, are aspiring to become stores of value, or at least advocates of BTC would have you believe that. And then our ninth token utility is social signaling. So the idea here is to convey social status, and that can be to do with identity, reputation, or some degree of exclusivity. So an example here would be holders of ENS domains. They can use it as an on-chain identifier to signal their identity. But we can also see it in NFT communities, where arguably investors or holders own the token to sort of signal something about their status, the idea that they're part of a community, and they have kind of some sort of sway and influence within that community, analogous to kind of buying luxury items, whether that's fashion items or luxury cars or whatnot. So now we move on to value accrual. So value accrual is a process by which value is generated, captured, retained, and distributed within a cryptoeconomic system. It ensures that participants are adequately incentivized and the system can continue to fund its operations and development. Value accrual, while it's never the primary consideration for a design, has to ultimately be considered if you want your system to be economically sustainable into the future. And also, if you have utilities such as governance, it's important that you have sufficient value accrual, otherwise you're at risk of governance attacks as well as other kind of economic attack vectors. So we differentiate between value generation and value capture. So the first point here is that value generation refers to the ability for a broader system to create value, typically going to be through the provisioning of some kind of product or service. And then value capture refers to the value that is retained within the system. Tokens can also drive additional value by incentivizing participation from both existing and new stakeholders and participants. It can also be useful for securing against economic vulnerabilities. And then third and finally, we want to make sure that value accrual never becomes parasitic. So one risk here might be if you were to build a project and you decided that you wanted to have a revenue sharing utility within your token, the risk might be that if you distributed too much revenue from the system to the token, then you're essentially diverting what could be useful capital for the operation and growth of the system to token holders. And so much like a public company makes decisions about dividend allocation to its equity holders, systems also have to be aware of not diverting too much capital away from the system into the token holders. And ultimately, value capture never wants to be threatening the kind of long-term goals of the system. So it is a careful kind of balancing act, but something that we have to be very much aware of. So there's many mechanisms by which value accrual can occur. The main one is through the different utilities that we've outlined. So the 9 different token utilities, they each map to different value accrual mechanisms. Those are far beyond the scope of today's talk. But value can also accrue through other methods, and network effects is probably the best example of this. So if that's something you're interested in, there's a whole host of literature I can refer you to. Timothy Peterson has done a lot of work in this aspect actually, but there's sufficient evidence to show that network effects result in significant value for blockchain networks, and that does seem to translate into the value of their native tokens. Then the third and final thing to say is that supply dynamics have significant effects on value accrual, or more specifically per token value accrual, and we'll be talking about that in much more detail later on. Then our next module here is rewards. So rewards are paid to participants as incentives for certain behaviours and contributions. They play a critical role in maintaining active and engaged ecosystems. And as we'll see, rewards include but also go beyond token-based rewards. So ultimately, rewards exist to incentivize participants to perform certain behaviours and with the goal of them contributing to the long-term objectives of the system over time. We want to be balancing the reward size as well as the frequency of rewards against the economic sustainability of the system over time. So we want to be preventing or mitigating against runaway inflation or the devaluation of tokens. Third, designing rewards to support long-term sustainability requires considering token supply as well as economic model implications. So rewards always have to be parameterized against the supply considerations of a system and a token model. And then mechanisms like burning can be used to adjust rewards over time. They can essentially act as a counterbalance against rewards. And that can help ensure system viability as well as the engagement of participants. There's kind of four main buckets of rewards. So you'll be familiar with token-based rewards, I'm sure, but there's also other forms. So rewards can come in the form of both a native token, so that would be a token that a project has issued for its participants, or it could also be issued in a non-native token. So for instance, a DeFi project, for whatever reason, might decide to issue rewards in Ether rather than its own native token. And there's kind of UX considerations that might factor into a consideration like that. But yeah, token-based rewards is the biggest category. Rewards can also happen by fiat. This is a lot more uncommon, typically seen as done through gift cards rather than direct bank transfers. The latter would obviously come with significant KYC, AML, and other considerations and user frictions. And then there's other ways to reward participants, whether that's through reputation systems or just badges and public acknowledgement, kind of boosting one's social status. These can all function as rewards. So the next module here is token supply. So token supply management just refers to the accountancy of tokens over time, and it's deeply connected to token rewards and can play an important role in shaping long-term behaviors for a system. There's 5 primary types of supply model. So the first is fixed, so a token is issued and the supply is fixed over time. The second would be disinflationary, so Bitcoin is the best example of this, where tokens are issued over time but the rate of issuance is decreasing. There's obviously different subtypes of disinflationary models. Bitcoin is probably the most prominent example of this. Inflationary token designs, where there's a constant rate of inflation. So many kind of proof-of-stake blockchains employ this approach. Cosmos and Polkadot would probably be prominent examples there. Deflationary, so deflationary is where a certain amount of tokens are issued at genesis, and then through burning or other mechanisms, the supply is decreasing over time. And then fifth and final would be dynamic. So typically, this is some combination or a hybrid model, and Ethereum is a good example of this, where we have new sources of tokens coming into existence through rewards, but we have mechanisms offsetting that, such as burning, and so ultimately the long-term supply outlook is unpredictable because it's a function of market dynamics. When we're making supply decisions, we have to align this with the system's long-term goals and market realities. We have to balance the economic stability with participant incentivization. And any supply model may need to change in the future. Ultimately, when it comes to supply management, we've got 2 buckets, sources and sinks. So sources increase token supply and sinks reduce token supply. And we can further split sinks into soft and hard sinks. So essentially the duration of an escrow or locking of a token determines where on the spectrum of soft to hard sink a sink would exist. Ultimately, supply matters and is relevant to value accrual, particularly on a per token basis. So changes to token supply are analogous to a change in the denominator. So all else being equal, token burning and token buybacks can increase per token value. That's kind of the core takeaway of this slide. And then token allocation. So token allocation just refers to the amount of tokens or the ratio of tokens that are divvied up amongst different stakeholder and participant groups, whether that's the team, community, or a different group of people. And getting this right is important because it ultimately can set the foundation for power dynamics in the future, especially if your token has anything to do with ownership or governance. But other utilities and rights are relevant to this point as well. And as mentioned here, we divide between different core groups when making allocation decisions. So these are just some examples of the different groups that we're looking at. And when we're making these allocation decisions, we need to be aware of the different stakeholder types, what their interests are, what their goals are, and what their kind of likely behaviors are. And we also want to be maintaining and achieving a balance that is to the benefit of the overall system. And this becomes relevant in the context of governance as well. So as mentioned, if your token is related to governance decision making, then making sure you have a viable and a healthy balance of voting power by your token is achieved with the allocation decisions that you're making early on. And then token distribution follows the allocation decision making. So once we've decided which groups are getting which ratio of tokens, we then have to decide how we're actually distributing these tokens to those groups. So that's the process by which we disperse them. The token generation event is the most prominent of this, and it's a very important event because it essentially injects capital, financial capital into our project through fundraising, but it can also provide important human capital as well as other supply side infrastructure. So we can delineate between three categories here. We have one-off events, which is typically going to be associated with a token generation event. Then we have continuous mechanisms, so this would be where rewards fits in. And then we have other mechanisms, so airdrops are one such example of this and are popular in the industry right now. Probably views on the utility and purpose of airdrops, but probably a subject for another day. All these decisions ultimately matter when it comes to price. So there's quite a lot of analysis that's been done in the past year on the different effects of distribution on token price and liquidity. The kind of core point here is that distribution is important to making sure you don't saturate the market with your token and essentially crash the price to the detriment of everyone involved. And then our final module for the day is governance. So governance is an incredibly broad, complicated topic. I'm obviously not going to be able to do it justice in 2 minutes, but we'll try and focus on the kind of most integral parts of governance decision making when it comes to cryptoeconomic design. So governance encompasses all the mechanisms and frameworks through which decisions are made and implemented, and it's critical in maintaining the system's integrity, adaptability, and alignment with the interests of all the stakeholders and participants. So governance design vectors and decisions can include a variety of things that relates to power distribution between both on and off-chain groups, and the kind of factors that come into governance design include efficiency, adaptability, inclusivity, security, and then also expectations around voter expertise as well as voter interest. These are all factors that come into play when designing a governance system. Some kind of general guardrails and principles for when designing a governance system. You're going to want to look for clear and transparent processes for proposing, debating, and implementing decisions. And these processes are typically going to involve some kind of debate, discussion, as well as signaling, voting, and deliberation, whether that's on-chain or off-chain. So wrapping up here, 3 core takeaways I want to have for people today. So firstly, cryptoeconomics is a broad and interdisciplinary field that complements blockchain technology in the creation of powerful digital economies. It's concerned primarily with the use of incentive structures, and that's typically done through the use of tokens, where we're aligning individual actions with the broader goals of systems. And ultimately, cryptoeconomics can enable novel economic structures while also driving higher growth rates, engagement, and value creation. So I'd like to thank you for your time. We'll take any questions. For context, Token Architecture is my design agency. Just Cryptoeconomics is a research group we launched 3 weeks ago. Those QR codes should take you to our websites. We'd love to have you at either. We have a Telegram group for just Cryptoeconomics where you can ask any questions about the field. I work with 2 other contributors on that research group, but things are all still very fresh. So yeah, love to have you there. I'd like to open up to any questions. Thank you.